Hey guys, Frosty and Eyes here again with another book review. This time we're going to be reviewing The Dark Tower number 6, Song of Susanna. And I know it's been a while since my last book review. That's because I've had some things going on. I've been trying to read too many books at once, which is never a good idea. I've been trying to read and do my writing, and I also spent 106 hours playing Ni no Kuni for the PS3. And maybe I'll do a review on that because that was a really good game. But anyway, here we are back with the penultimate book in the Dark Tower series. We got one more to go. And I just finished Song of Susanna. This one was written and released in 2004. This one clocks in at 411 pages. One of the shorter books in the series. This one here is also one of the nicely illustrated ones. Lots of pictures inside. And this is one of the books that I think started to divide the readers of The Dark Tower. And we'll get to that. So, when we left Roland and his quartet and Wolves of the Calla, they had defeated the Wolves, they had saved Calibra and Sturgis, but Mia had kidnapped Susanna's body, taken Black 13, and went through the unfound door into our world in the year 1999. And that's where we're left off. This book takes place entirely in our world. Not in Midworld, in our world. So, there's two basic stories going on in this book. Mia and Susanna have crossed over, taken Black 13, have gone to New York in 1999, and are trying to get to the Dixie Pig so that Mia can have her chap, who she has decided to name Mordred. Two separate groups of Roland's quartet, they've split up, and they've decided to go after her. They managed to get the door open without Black 13. They managed to use magic to get the door open, and all four have gone through. Jake and Father Callahan wind up getting sucked through the door into 1999 and going after Susanna. Eddie and Roland wind up getting sucked through the door into 1977, and they're going after Calvin Tower to protect the Rose. So we've got two things going on both in our world. So, on the Susanna side, you've got Susanna in New York, Mia's in control, and they have to get to the Dixie Pig. You do find out a little bit about Mia, where she came from. She was a demon, an ancient demon, who has sacrificed her immortality. She made a bargain with Flag and sacrificed her immortality in order to have a baby. And the baby, now she's going to try to get to the Dixie Pig on Lexington and 61st in order for her to have her baby. And the Dixie Pig is completely filled with low men and vampires. And they're waiting. They're waiting for Mia to come so that she can have her kid. And then they're basically going to kill Mia and Susanna and eat them because they're also cannibals. And meanwhile, Jake and Father Callahan get jolted into New York, 1999, and they're going after Susanna, and they're trying to rescue her from the Dixie Pig. That's pretty much Susanna's part of the story. The other part of the story is Roland and Eddie in 1977, and they're in Maine, and they're trying to get to Calvin Tower. And as soon as they get to Maine, they have a shootout with Enrico Balazar's men, Jack Andolini and a whole bunch of people. They wind up having a shootout in Maine, and they manage to get away from that. They find a guy who helps them get away from Balazar's men. They finally track down Tower, and they get him to sell them the Rose, the vacant lot with the Rose, for $1. So Calvin Tower finally signs over the lot to Roland, to what they call the Tech Corporation. They create a corporation using Susanna's money because Susanna's rich because her father was a dentist. So they wind up using her money. They get Calvin Tower to sign over with the rose. So now they've protected the rose. But while they're there, they realize that they're not too far from Stephen King. They realize that Stephen King is in Maine. Remember, Father Callahan found Salem's Lot? So Eddie and Roland decide to go visit Stephen King. And this is kind of where people who read the Tower, they get a little concerned because Stephen King wrote himself into the book. Stephen King himself has now become a character in the Dark Tower novels. So Roland and Eddie go to see Stephen King. They go to his house. And the first thing Stephen King does when he sees Roland is he runs. He goes bug shit and he runs because to him, Roland is a character that is in his mind. There's no way that Roland can be standing in his doorstep. So Eddie and Roland get to King and they finally start to talk to him. And they want to know. They want to know, hey, why are there books? Are we real? They want all these questions that have started coming up. Are we real? Did you create us? What's going on? Roland winds up hypnotizing King with the little bullet trick that he does. And you find out that King, in the Dark Tower stories, King is a conduit. All the stories that Stephen King is writing, that Stephen King thinks is fiction, is not fiction. He's writing the lives of these people. So he's getting all this information from the Tower itself, and he's channeling it through him, and he's writing these stories that he thinks are fiction, but they're not. They're real people, and these are their stories. And so Roland and Eddie find this out, and Roland also finds out that Stephen King has stopped writing the Tower because he doesn't want to write Roland's story anymore because Roland scares him. So Roland convinces King to keep writing. To keep writing the Tower because Roland feels that if King were to stop writing Roland's story, then Roland's quest will fail. So King agrees after their long talk, and then Eddie and Roland leave King, and they go to Turtleback Lane, and they try to find a way back, and they're trying to find a way back into Midworld. So, that's pretty much what happens in this book. We're left, at the end of this book, this is where we're left with. Mia and Susanna are in the Dixie Pig. Mia is in labor. The Low Men and the Vampires have ushered her from the Dixie Pig into Fennec, and she's about to give birth to Mordred. Callahan and Jake are about to lay siege to the Dixie Pig. They're breaking into the Dixie Pig, and they think they're gonna die, but they're gonna try their damnedest to save Susanna. Roland and Eddie, they've saved the rose. The rose has been preserved. The tower has sold them the lot, so the rose is safe. And they've met Stephen King. And so Stephen King is going to keep writing the stories. And so the stories will go on. So now Roland and Eddie are going to try to find their way back to Midworld and to try to get back to Callahan and Jake and Susanna, if they can. And that's pretty much the story. Two things happen of note that I want to mention in the story. Number one, Jake and Callahan wind up stealing Black 13 from Mia's hotel room, and they wind up putting it in storage in the bottom of the World Trade Centers, in the Twin Towers, because they're trying to keep it safe. So it's never explicitly mentioned, but the implication is that when the towers get destroyed during 9/11, Black 13 gets destroyed with it. And then, once all that stuff happens, we're left with, at the end of the very end of the book, we are left with a couple of pages entitled Pages from a Writer's Journal. And basically we're left with what is essentially a diary, of Stephen King diary. And Stephen King is writing through the years about, writing The Towers, about his life's work, about his battles with alcoholism. It's basically, his journals through the years, how he keeps writing The Towers, how he writes about the drawing of the three, and how he writes about the wasteland, and he writes about the Wizard in Glass, and he's writing all these stories, and everything's going very, very well. And then finally, the very last thing that we get, where the book finally leaves us, is right here. Stephen King dies at the end of the book. Stephen King writes his accident into this book. And what the theory is that the Crimson King is trying to stop Stephen King from writing Roland's story. And he's got him addicted, and he's thrown all these things at King to try to get him to stop writing the Tower stories. And then finally, he gets hit by the van, boom. And in this story, at the end, King dies. So now that's where we're left. We're left with a whole bunch of stuff going into book 7. And so that's where we leave everything. In the book, King dies. And I think, that's where some people started to wonder about the Dark Tower, because Stephen King has actually written himself into the Tower as a character. And I don't know if that went over well with some people. I kind of understand, in a way, why he did it, because the Tower has always been his muse. It could have been done... He could have done without it, I guess. Putting himself into the story may be a slightly bit egotistical. Putting himself as a character. It certainly allows him to twist the rules of fiction, and then basically, when you're a character in your own story, you can do whatever you want. And so it's not really a story, I guess, about Roland anymore, maybe. But, it was a decent book. It's an easy read. Maybe I'll give it a 3 out of 5. Because not a lot happens, and as far as action goes, a lot of explanation goes on in the book, but not a lot happens. So, that's my review of Dark Tower Song of Susanna. We've got one left, The Dark Tower. 800 and some odd pages long. That's going to take me a while to read, but that's where all the majority of all the rest of the action is going to be. And that's where the rest of the people who read The Dark Tower get pissed off. They get a little pissed off from this book. They're going to get a lot more pissed off in the last book. So, we're almost there. This isn't the strongest one, I think, in the series. Not my favorite. Personally, not my favorite in the series. I'll give it a 3 out of 5. You obviously can't skip it, because you got to keep going. It's a series. So anyway, I'm going to get started reading that big beast, that 800-page beast of a Tower book. So that way I can get the next review up. And until then, like, comment, subscribe. Tell me what you think about the Tower series or King in general, or anything you want in the comment below. And until next time, keep on reading.